Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Dr. James Griffin.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you for being here today. And we spoke many years ago, but inshallah, we're going to have a very nice, productive discussion today. And I just want to introduce you. I'm Dr. Jafar Griffin, also Dr. James Griffin, and you're the founder of Return to Fitra, and you've recently completed your PhD on educational leadership, where your dissertation was on spiritual abuse.
Yes, I just recently finished that in July, and as we'll get into it, I worked with others to found a group that works against spiritual abuse called Return to Fitra. That's our little plug there. So Return to Fitra on the various social media platforms. And yes, just this summer, I finished my doctorate on in educational leadership, and my dissertation was on spiritual abuse, which a lot of the content I got was from in Sheikh's clothing, the cases that are on the website there. So I used a lot of that for my dissertation. So alhamdulillah, I finished that.
Alhamdulillah. And as I mentioned, we spoke many years ago and have stayed in touch. And some of your story is very intriguing. And I want to ask you, how was your life before you joined the Sufi Tariqa?
So I had a very good life. I would say that we were, around middle class. We lived in a very rural town. I'm one of 12 siblings. So we have a pretty big family. We have a blended family, and we have a mixed family as far as biracial. My mother's Caucasian white, my father's African American, and life was good. Besides the point where we lived in a small rural town in upstate New York, where at the time, before getting involved with the group that we're going to mention, the cult, our family was the only black family, or one of two black families in the town, and we were the only Muslim family in the town. So as you can imagine, we're dealing with racism. It's kind of like a double whammy because, we're African American and we're Muslim, right? They're Muslims, right? So you got that going on. But other than that, like I grew up, we had a very close-knit family. I would say a very happy upbringing as a child, no type of abuse, no type of anything like that. So it was very good life that we had, besides dealing with the, racism and that type of stuff as anybody
Right.
in that situation would deal with.
And this group I know is generational. Like many families have been there since the inception, and then their kids are born in it. And I think all the way down to grandkids at this stage, right? Were you born into the group?
No, so for me, I encountered the group. Me and my brothers encountered the group because as I said, we lived in this rural town in upstate New York called Deposit. And you can go on Google Maps and find it in upstate New York. It's about 2 or 3 hours north of New York City, right? And growing up until I was like a teenager, again, we're the only black Muslim family in this rural town. And around like 8th or ninth grade, there was an influx of African-American Muslims. And pretty much this group called the Muslims of the Americas, or Al Fukra, or TMOA, you can see them online. They pretty much purchased land, and a bunch of families from New York City moved to this land. So there was an influx of students. And again, we're the only black Muslims in the town. And naturally, when other black Muslims come into town and they start going to our schools, we naturally became friends. So how I encountered the group is just by kind of, assimilation, just being around, growing up for years in high school with my friends, visiting their homes, and just kind of just assimilated into the group. So my friends, though, like they're second generation, some third generation, and then getting into now, we're getting to fourth, even fifth generations of members that have been part of this group.
Okay. And then you mentioned some reasons, but are there any reasons that stand out of maybe not just why you joined, but also why you stayed in the group? And how long did you stay?
Yeah, so there was no like official joining, right? Growing up in high school, again, these are my friends. I'm going to their house. I'm going to their lands. And this is why it's important as Muslims, people that are listening to this, it's important to, no matter where you are in your life, it's always important to be connected to the Ummah at some level, right? Because we're living in a rural town. The closest city was Binghamton, New York, where there was a growing Muslim population there. Right. However, like the only involvement we had with the Binghamton Muslim community was every now and we'd go to the Eid prayers. That's twice a year, and that was pretty much it. So then this community comes in, and now they're having Jumas, they're having Eids, they're having other different Islamic holidays that are celebrating. Now this becomes like my community. Now this becomes my as a teenager, I'm getting engrossed in Islamic behavior, meal aspects, so that I became involved in there. And as I grow up, get older. I'll say I didn't grow up yet, getting older, around 18, 19. Now I'm looking to get married. Why? Because all my friends, the people in the group get married young there. They get 18, 17, 18, 19. They're getting married. My friends are all getting married. So like, okay, I need to get married too, right? This is what my friends are doing. And this just reminds me of a hadith, where Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, you're on the religion of your companions, right? So whoever you're surrounding yourself with, you're kind of going to do the same things that they're doing. So when I really got in deep with the group was when I actually got married, because I married somebody from the group. And that was like, looking back, there should have been so many red flags at that point, because a lot of people were resisting, saying that, the sister, my ex-wife, shouldn't marry me because I wasn't part of the group. They wanted to sit me down and take a video recording of me taking bayat to the Sheikh and other things to no, we need to vet him and make sure that he's one of us before we allow one of our, women to marry him. And if it wasn't for one of my friends, his father was a high ranking, a Khalifa in the group. He said, no, he doesn't have to do that, and kind of, vouch for me. And then I married. And that's when I really got engrossed, because now I'm married, starting a family. And then now everything's kind of being, going through the filter of that.
So you never joined by giving bayah. You were around the group, maybe for social reasons, but your wife was she born into it?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, but she was a true believer in the group and
yes,
properly initiated.
Yep. Yeah. So I didn't take an official bayat until years later, when they made everybody in the group retake their bayat, to reassert their allegiance to the group. And I just happened to be there, part of the movie. So I just signed the paper and just, move on with my life. But yeah, my ex-wife, she was born and raised in the group, and her parents are first generation. They joined the group. And when he first came over here and started recruiting people, that's when they first joined.
Okay. And then will you say there was a period that you were a believer in the group?
Yes. Yeah. So I would say growing up, especially being, separated from the Ummah, our Islam, if we go back, our family's Islam, my mother and father converted to Islam when I was an infant, right?
Okay.
And their conversion to Islam could basically be associated with Malcolm X, coming to Sunni Islam.
Mhm.
Okay. And my mother, my Caucasian mother, was the primary driver of that, of our family becoming Muslim. So they became Muslim. Then everybody else, born after me, and my older brothers and sisters, everybody was Muslim in the family. But when we separated from the main community in Binghamton, the local city, or the nearest city, and we're by ourselves at this rural town, our Islam at that point was pretty much you believe in one God. Jesus isn't God or the Son of God. We fast during Ramadan. We pray. And we don't eat pork.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you're doing that, that's, you're good. So I wasn't there was no classes I was taking to learn the 5 pillars of, of Islam, the 6 articles of faith. I'm not learning any of that type of stuff. Just we pray. I'm not even learning how to pray. So it's my father was praying in English, I follow him. I'm not learning how to pray by myself. That's our Islam. So very low level knowledge at that point. So when I meet these guys, I'm 15, I don't know what the age is at where psychologically people start gravitating towards faith. But I started I learned my Islam, that version of Islam, through that group. So as I'm learning that, and this is what, people that are new to this, you'll learn that people that take advantage of people using religion, they use the truth. And that truth you hold on to, whatever truth you do get from them, whether it's learning how to pray, learning how to read Quran, learning hadith, whatever you're learning from, you kind of start associating that with the group or the person that you're learning it from, even though this is actually laws guiding you through people, right? So my Islam was heavily associated with this group, right? Even if I was learning it on my own, I still associated it with the group. I'm reading books by myself. I taught myself how to read Arabic, not through the group, but I learned from the group. So I pretty much became really a believer, like I said, around the time I got married. A little bit before that, I'm heavily engrossed with my friends. Everything that we talk about, everything they talk about is about the Sheikh, about the group, all the different superstitions and beliefs that go on in the group. And I just jump right in and it becomes my belief.
You were all living in one area, right? On one land?
Yes.
So what was daily life like there?
So daily life, on the lands, at least the land that I grew up near. It's called Islamberg. And for people that are listening, you might have heard of a group in upstate New York that was threatened by a white nationalist named Robert Dogger from Tennessee. This is the same group. You might have heard of a group that was threatened by two young men from Rochester that was threatening to go blow up the group in Rochester, New York. This is the same group, right? And so many different times that this group has been in the news, Islamberg, New York. And this is considered the headquarters of the Muslims of America, TMOA. So daily life on that land or on that compound, whatever you want to call it, was pretty much people would go to work. A lot of the men worked in New York City, so they would travel to New York City and be away from their family for like a week or two at a time, sometimes some people months, or go to the local city, which is Binghamton, New York, and work entry-level jobs and just come back for. So it was pretty much regular daily life. But then Fridays would be a Juma, which only a few people were like authorized to do the Juma. Daily life was kind of like any other person's daily life. You go to work, you pay your bills, and that's it. However, where there's not a good term for it, but I call them like high indoctrination events. There was these types of things that would happen that were like, okay, it's high time that we get people to kind of like really ingrain themselves in this community and this belief. And they would be around like the Eids, the other is like holidays they would have, whether it be like what they call them like Ursas, celebrating like when a saint or a wali died, the Sheikh's birthday, what else? Or, you know, the Mawlads, and then summertime was the key indoctrination events. And this is where we pretty much would go to what they call retreats. And now I went to started going to these retreats when I'm 15, 16 years old. And looking back, you know, you're a kid, you're just having fun. You think you're out there playing in the woods, but in actuality, they were like military training camps. We were out in the woods, people that are as young as like 12, 13 years old, up to young men that are in their 20s and 30s all together, living in the woods for about 3-4 weeks at a time and doing like military maneuvers, learning how to like sneak up behind somebody and slit their throat, right? Disarming people that have guns, target practice. Now for a kid, you're like, oh, this is fun. We're playing war. Like, you know, you're not even thinking about this. But during these camps, you're being indoctrinated because we're being taught that, you know, we're the group that's going to save the world. We're Imam Mahdi's army. We're going to take over the United States and rule and all these different things. And that was really like those summer retreats where it was just pretty much military training for the group, but also indoctrination because all we would watch is the Sheikh's discourses, his video. We'd sit down for hours and watch them. And all the talk would be about how great the Sheikh is. The Sheikh said that Allah forgave you for all your sins for coming to the retreat and those types of things. So as far as daily life, you wouldn't look, you could look at them and say, they're just a regular Muslim family, nothing strange. They're going to work, they're coming home, that's it. But then when you look at these other events that they're doing, then you say, oh, wait a minute, why are they doing this? Why is all the talk about the Sheikh and not Allah and not Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? You know, so that's how you'd see the difference. You have to actually be inside to see the difference.
But are you aware of what the perception of the group was by the masajid or other groups in the area?
Yeah. So there was the group, and just so people know, the group is 99.999% African American. So other local masjids, you know, because would look at the group as like, okay, they're weird, right? Just they're weird. Because actually we really wouldn't participate with other local masjids on a regular day-to-day basis. Sometimes a handful might go there for Juma, but it was generally taught like, oh, don't go to other masjids for Juma. People that were in need, they couldn't get help, like financial help from the community, so they would go to the local masjids to ask for money for help. So from the outside looking in from other Muslims, they kind of looked at us like beggars, or that were just weird.
So you got this reputation because of the interactions these masajid would have with the group members coming to them?
The outside masjids would just know about the group from, like you said, the interactions with individuals that would go to the masjids. As far as like what they really wouldn't know what would go on behind closed doors or actually on the properties. And the one thing which I think that we need to do better as a ummah is, even though a few people might have known that things were wrong, Individuals that would know about behind the scenes or hear things that happen behind the scenes in the group, they really wouldn't say anything about it. They'd keep quiet about it, kind of like, oh, we're Muslim. And there's like, and you know this when you're dealing, whether it's, spiritual abuse or sexual misconduct, us Muslims living in the United States, we kind of have this like, well, I don't want to say anything bad because it's going to make Muslims look bad.
Were the neighboring masajid, did they think you mentioned because of the interactions, but
Mm-hmm.
was there any sort of Salafi Sufi tension there?
No, not at all. Because like the local masjid here, there wasn't really a strong like Salafi or Sufi presence,
Just
right?
average Muslim type thing.
Just average Muslims, yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, there was you could say a handful of individuals that would be here and there that would, try to push mainly like the Salafi, type of stuff. But they didn't really have a strong presence here. So the stuff that they would say against us really wouldn't take root. And then the people in the group would easily just dismiss them because, oh, you're a Salafi, you're a Wahhabi, and we're not listening to you,
Right, right.
Yeah.
Right. And then one of the questions I had for you was, when did you first notice something was wrong or began questioning things in the group?
So, and this is a common question I get from people I talk to, and it's hard to answer because sometimes for some people I talk to, I ask the same question. There is like one clear thing. They're like, oh, that's it. But like me looking back, and it was like, it kind of changes every single time. And it was a compilation of different things that happen over years, because as much as we like to think of like, oh, there's this one thing that happens and then people just wake up and it took me years of like recognizing things and kind of moving towards the truth, then falling back, like, 3 steps forward, 4 steps back, and just kind of until I finally, okay, this is just too much. But I will say that from the beginning of me being in the group, there was always things that happened. I was like, that's not right. That's not right. But me, just like a lot of other people in the group, we would dismiss it as like, oh, these are just people. This is like every organization has problems and these are just our problems. And as long as it wasn't happening to me, it's easy to kind of just, yeah, it's, it doesn't really concern me. It's none of my business, right? And as Muslims, we fall into the, we got to give them 70 excuses. And then there's the other one of like, oh, we can't speak about it publicly. We got to speak about it privately. And you go through all these different things. But I would say if I wanted to, looking back, the most important like red flags that happened near the time when I actually like took the steps to get out was about the money. And just for a little context, to be a part of the group, they have this thing they call membership dues or membership fees, where we actually had to pay a percentage of our income to belong to the group. Throughout the years, that's changed. It's ranged from 10% of your income, 10% of your gross income, to at some years before I joined the group, some people were paying 100% of their income. And so when I was in the group, it ranged from 10% to 30%.
Say anything to justify that?
So and this is one of the slick tactics that was used. They would never really say exactly what it was. They let people assume what it was for. So like, for instance, for like me, when I first started paying, I just assumed it was zakat. This is going towards, charity, helping poor people, and they'll let you run with that. Right. So I just, okay, it's zakat. No one said it wasn't. So I'm just giving money for zakat. Then you learn, oh, wait, zakat's not 10%. Zakat's not 20%. It's only 2.5%. What are we doing here? Then if you start asking questions, and in my generation, some people started asking questions like, hey, what's going on with this? Me being one of them. So when I remember I asked, what is this for? And then the first answer was like, oh, it's for charity. It's to help poor people in Pakistan. It's like, oh, okay, I could get down with that. I can give 10% of my, income to help poor people in Pakistan. But then and the one thing that I really remember is, so we pay this money, we pay 10%, and we're getting to the digital age now, right? Where there's Cash App, there's Venmo, there's PayPal, there's all these different electronic means where you can send money. And for me, it was easy to send money electronically. So I would just Cash App whoever the collector was. Now, me, and just a little bit more about my background, I'm an auditor. So what I do is I look at governments and we look at their finances, we look at their books, we look for fraud, we look for mishandling, misappropriation of money. And there's various red flags that, we look for, like when we hear certain things like, oh, that's a red flag, we need to look into this further. And at one time, they had a mandatory meeting where they announced to everybody that they would no longer be accepting electronic payments, that they would only accept cash payments. Now, in the auditor world, that's a big red flag because it's easier to conceal and misappropriate cash. If you have electronic payments, tracks it, right? I sent you $100. Where did that money go? So that was a red flag with me. I was like, wait, so, okay, what's going on? So during the meeting, I raised my hand and I asked, well, it's more convenient for me to pay electronically. That way I could just get you the money. It's out of my wallet. Nothing's going to come up where I spend it and all that. And then the one thing you don't do with an auditor is give them numbers, right? If you don't want to be found out, don't give them any numbers. And the lady that was running the meeting, she said, well, we're not going to do that because less than 1% of the money we collect comes in electronically. So basically she was trying to justify like, we hardly get any money electronically. Well, that was the wrong thing to say to me because based off of the money I knew I was giving and based off of the handful of people I knew that was what they made and what they were giving electronically, it was easy to calculate or estimate how much money they were actually collecting. And then that's where I figured out, wait, they're collecting millions of dollars. So when I kind of like, wait a minute, they're collecting millions of dollars. And if this was going to like feed poor people in Pakistan or whatever, like the Sheikh would win a Nobel Peace Prize or something. Like millions of dollars are going over there every year. There's no possible way. Because before that, you would just think like, oh, people don't really pay. They're only probably collecting a few thousand a month or whatever. Millions of dollars. And that's when I really was like, okay, something is definitely wrong here, that this person is collecting millions of dollars. The next thing that happened right after that, and this is just, Allah is the best of guides, because when Allah decides that he's going to guide someone to the truth, it happens. And you look back and hindsight's 2020, but you see how Allah just put all these pieces of the puzzle in perfect order so that it can wake a person up. Inside the group, I was responsible for transcribing and editing the Sheikh's video discourses. So I would get recordings of his, like he would go by Skype. I would get these recordings and I would transcribe them, edit them, and do all these, so that the public, our community, can benefit from them. And for some reason, he did a Skype lecture or meeting with them, and I was asking the people that were in charge, can you give me the recording so I could do my job? And for some reason, they were very hesitant to give me this recording. And the person that was in charge said, well, we have to edit a few things out of it before we give it to you because there was a private meeting that we don't want you to hear. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, fine. Do what you got to do, right? I get the recording, and for some reason, they must have forgotten to edit out that private meeting. And in the meeting, the Sheikh is talking to his leaders or his, deputies, and he says how he mentions how he gave his friend $3 million so that they could buy a property in Pakistan. And that guy that they gave the $3 million to ran off with the money. So not only did it confirm my estimation of like them collecting millions of dollars, it also was like, wait a minute, they're taking the money and just buying property and stuff. Our community is the United States, and they're spending millions of dollars, and not even on a property, because you know how like some cultures, like you have to bribe somebody to be able to do anything. That was their bribe money to this guy to be able to get to buy the property, and he ran off with it, And it wasn't so much the amount of money that was really like opened up my eyes to like something's going on here. It was also the way that the Sheikh talked about losing $3 million. He talked about it as like, if me and you, Danish, were talking, and I'm like, yeah, I let my friend borrow $20 and he hasn't paid me back. So, oh well. And I was just like, that's $3 million of our money that he used to bribe somebody that they ran off with it, and he's just speaking like it's nothing. I was like, what that means is $3 million was like $20.
Yeah.
And it was just like,
and was he, maybe you didn't know at this time, but was he also justifying this property as a hijra property? Like, did he eventually want to get people from America to move out there or start a school, or was you just didn't know anything about it?
The original intent for that, they called it Jelanieville, which is after the name of that Sheikh, was Sheikh Mubarak Jelani. And it was supposed to be not for us to make hijra to, not for anybody to move there. It was for him and his family to basically create like a model community of what we were supposed to be doing in America. So
Right.
they were going to
Yeah.
buy property to start a farm and build
But it was
masjids
still
and do all this.
justified,
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
as in not justified, but he gave a justification for it.
Gave a reason
That's what I
for it,
mean.
yes. But here's the thing. They were raising money separately for that cause. So it's like all these different things falling into place. It's like, wait a minute, we have another fundraiser to buy this property, but you already had $3 million. Like we're trying to raise money for like $20,000 to buy property, and you have
Correct.
$3 million to bribe somebody.
And I think you mentioned something that, for you and I is easy to understand, but just for listeners who may not be as familiar with these groups,
Yeah.
can you explain the hierarchy that was there? Because you mentioned deputies, muqaddams, right? So there's the administration, just explain the tiers of the group and how it operated. So the ones who had the private counsel with the sheikh, who knew things, who would then convey that to the rest of you, and however the administration worked.
Yep. So you had the sheikh at the top, who's, he's in charge of everything.
But he's in Pakistan.
And he's in Pakistan. Again, like he wasn't with the group for 30 years. He was running everything from Pakistan. He was actually only in America for maybe like around 5 years. And
Would
then he
he
left
visit
back to
though?
Pakistan.
Would he visit back and forth?
No, he left and never came back. Not once.
Okay, but then you had some senior members who would go visit him and come back, correct?
Yeah. So there
Okay.
was, as far as the structure goes, you had the sheikh at the top, and then below him, there would be what they called caliphas, what we called caliphas. And it'd be a handful of individuals that were appointed by the sheikh as caliphas. And within that group, there'd be one head khalifa, which is he's in charge of the rest. Like he's like the sheikh's right-hand man. And then below that, they would have people, what they would call nazms, which I don't know what that term means. I don't know if it's like a Urdu word but they're called nazms. They're like lower level. And then below that, or not really below that, but around the same level, at some point they created what they called mayors and town councils of each property. So the group at the time had about, or they still do, about 9 to 10 properties located in various locations around the United States. So it was like there's one in New York, one in Virginia, there's two in New York, two in Virginia, one in Georgia, one in Tennessee, one in Texas, one in Canada. So each location would have like a town council and someone they would call a mayor. But their function was really just to run the day-to-day activities of that land, like make sure the roads are plowed or get the garbage taken out, that sort of thing. But as far as like the structure goes for like running the whole group, it was the sheikh at the top and then caliphas below that. And those caliphas, we would call it the shura council. And then later on, like more recent times, up to like around the time I left, they started adding non-caliphas to the group, which there's another thing here because I'm excluding the women. Mostly the women are actually more powerful than the men in the group, which is a whole nother, like we could have a conversation on that, but they would be called amiras, right? I guess amir, but amiras.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I do recall that about the powerful positions that the women in the group had. So please do get into that.
Yep. So the men would be caliphas, the women would be amirs, but at a certain point, right? And this is because again, we're talking multi-generational. So the original foundation was the caliphas were like, they're in charge, and these were men, right? But they started getting older, some passing away, and then leadership is changing. So you're getting younger people being appointed as caliphas. And also at the same time, the sheikh is getting older. So even though he's in charge, he started kind of like taking a back seat and letting people do more of the day-to-day stuff. And that happened to be one of his wives, who now, fast forwarding today, who now is the imam and sheikha of the group now. So
and where's she from?
And she's from America. She's American. Yes. And what happens is like your power comes by who you're associated with in the group. Doesn't really matter who your title is. You could have no title, but if you're close to like, say his wife, you have more power because you can get his wife to kind of influence the sheikh and say whatever. So, and that's where it leads to like a lot of the women that end up getting a lot of power in the group. Because, I don't want to say negative things about women or women's nature or whatever, but women are more apt to push and get what they want, whereas men are more like, it's not that big of a deal, I'm going to take a back seat. So especially in the group, if a woman wants to like, say, get somebody in trouble, get somebody punished, she's going to go and use her resources to get that done. And the women are connected to who actually is, the sheikh is taking a back seat. And now the next most powerful person in the group is his wife. And the women that are connected to his wife, they become more powerful, and there's a lot of dynamics here. Like we would need like a flow chart because you have Khalifas, you have Amiras, you have Nazms, you have mayors, you have town councils. But like I said, the most important factor in the group was like who you are connected to, because you can be somebody with no title whatsoever. But if your daughter married the Sheikh, guess what? No one's going to question you, and you have a lot of authority because your daughter is actually married to the Sheikh, which there's several examples of that. Yeah.
And at a certain point, the most active leadership was coming from the woman, right?
Yes. Yes. So, and this is like hindsight, because it's not really hindsight, but at a certain point, and like if you listen to how people talk in the group, even when I was in the group, the verbiage of how they would relay the Sheikh's messages kind of changed, right? Where they would, instead of saying like the Sheikh said, or Abuji said, we used to refer to him as Abuji said, they would say things like, it came from overseas that you got to do X, Y, Z. And then we kind of figured out, like, when they're not specifically saying the Sheikh's name, they're actually talking about his wife, but they want you to think that it's coming from the Sheikh. Like she has a thick
Right.
Sheikh's authority. So like, that's when, and then as he got older, more and more that came into the point where it's like, okay, we just knew that she was in charge, right? She used to be the one sending the messages. She'd be the one, the verbiage changed on like the directives that came out. And even up to like, when I left, like the Sheikh was very sick. He's elderly, he couldn't even walk. He could barely, get himself fixed up to actually have like a Skype meeting, to address the people. And it was very clear that, his wife was actually running the show.
And did you have any relationship with the Sheikh? Any personal meetings, direct contact, anything of that nature?
So not that much. I've had a couple of direct contacts, but it was very limited. Not to say it's any meaningful, but inside the group, that was like gold, right? You talk to the Sheikh, or the Sheikh said your name or whatever. Because what got me in the good graces, or the personal connection that I had with the Sheikh, is, I wrote a proposal, because he used to communicate, again, he's in Pakistan. He used to communicate with the group via like VHS tapes back in the day. And then we got DVDs. He would record a DVD, and then these DVDs would come over to the United States. And these were like prime real estate. If you can get a copy of these DVDs, have them in your home, and be able to like quote from them, the Sheikh said this, the Sheikh said that, like you were like an all-star in the community. I wanted to make this more available to people. And again, I'm still thinking like, okay, the groups, the Sheikh says in his teachings, and we always preach this in the group, like our mission is to guide mankind. So my thing is like, okay, well, we need to get these teachings out to the people, right? How do we do that? People aren't, we have those recordings on, cassette tapes, VHS tapes, DVDs. At a certain point, like people won't be able to access this stuff. So I wrote a proposal to basically transcribe all of his recorded works and put them into book form. And when he heard about this proposal, he was very excited, right? Because it's, it's promoting his stuff, right? Get my stuff out there to the people. And he invited me overseas. I never had a chance to go. Alhamdulillah, that was a law protecting me from certain things. But I never had a chance to go visit him overseas. But whenever he heard my name, this was told to me by his leading administrators, that whenever he heard my name, he would smile. He set me over personal designs to design my home, and these sorts of things. So that's like the connection I had with the Sheikh.
Okay. And can you just add a little bit more? Because this is a common thread, right? That if what you mentioned, even if he smiles when mentioning your name, there's an immediate status boost to everybody else in the group, right? Because they see the Sheikh's pleasure as the pleasure of God. And that means you're something special because you've been validated.
Yeah. So as soon as I got this like approval from him, things within the community on this end changed with me. Like, so for instance, we go into the masjid, and in our masjids, like front row is reserved for the people that have the status and the power, right? You can't just go walk to the first rank of the salat without being somebody. And after this, like now I'm sitting in the back, and now these leaders are now coming and grabbing me like, oh no, come sit up here with us. Right. So like they're validating like, oh, he's got approval from the Sheikh. So like we need to support that. I'm getting pointed to like, at one point I was in charge of all the youth activities in the nation for the group. Like I was a head of youth activities. Right. So that correlated to just how I was treated amongst other people inside the group. It gave me a lot of status, but I
Yeah.
was never a person that like was big on like status and trying to get power. Like everything I did was trying, for the best of my ability, trying to do it for Allah's sake. It was never a big thing for me, but I seen the reaction of how community members and other leaders in the group treated me because the Sheikh favored me at that point in time. And I had a lot more leeway to have conversations with people, say different things and do different things that other people didn't have.
And the danger of that is once you fall out of the Sheikh's grace, which we'll get into, is he can make one negative comment about you or even half a negative comment saying, oh, James is a good kid, but he just doesn't understand this. And then immediately you're on the blacklist. Could you share some of the tactics that the group used to keep you away and disconnected from the larger Muslim community?
Yeah, and there's a lot of different things and I'm probably going to forget half of the things, but there was a lot. So the first and most obvious ones was just the isolation, right? Not only the physical isolation by, moving out to communities in the rural areas away from the rest of the Muslim Ummah, but also like the mental isolation. So we weren't allowed to like read other books or take in other information unless it was from our Sheikh or our Sheikh specifically approved it, right? So that was the first thing. So like seeking knowledge, it had to be through the materials that were available in the community. We were also told like in the lectures that we were the only true Muslims. All the other Muslims in the world are either munafiqs or kafirs or something that basically takes them outside of the fold of Islam. Like you're either munafiq or kafirs, but we're the only true Muslims. So you're automatically thinking that like, okay, why would I go associate with these people and they're not real Muslims? Other tactics were that it was highly frowned upon to marry anybody from outside the community. So you had to marry within the community, especially the women. Like if they met somebody at the local masjid and tried to get married, heavily frowned upon, right? It was told to us that if we leave the community, it's the same thing as apostating. At to one point, they would say that you won't remain Muslim, and at other points, it was preached that if you leave the community, you aren't Muslim. And like to the point where like we weren't allowed to pray in other masjid, even to like there was things. And what people have to understand is that the majority of this group didn't actually live on the compounds, right? They live in the local towns and cities that are around the villages. And there'd be certain things like, for instance, we weren't allowed, it was taught to us that your wudu wasn't accepted if you made a wudu with city water, right? If you made all the water in all the cities, all the towns, all the villages was polluted and not sufficient for your wudu to be accepted. So you would have people that would live, like, for instance, I know of people that lived in Philadelphia and New York City that went years without making a wudu or a ghusl. And all they would do is just make a tayammun for their salats because they thought the water wasn't sufficient to make a wudu. They would drive all the way to the compounds or the lands to get water in jugs from the lands, then drive, hours back to their home and keep it a special water container just to make wudu with the pure water that was from the land. And there's so many different things like that would happen that were, mentally, physically, spiritually, that we're like, okay, the only way I could actually live in this world and be a good Muslim is if it comes from this sheikh or this community. Like to the point where like I can't even make a wudu without actually going to get water from this specific land.
So what happened when you decided to leave?
So again, it was years in the making of me building up to deciding to leave. And, because there was a lot of doubt. I'm thinking, how we're brought up there, they're saying doubts from Shaitan. If you have any doubt, it's got to be the devil influencing you. So I was in a state where like, I'm thinking these doubts are coming from Shaitan. So I'm trying to find ways to like, get them out, still believe in what the Sheikh's doing. And again, I mentioned that project I was doing where I was transcribing and making all his works into books. I was like, it's somewhere in the back of my head, I was like, no, if I finish this, like it's going to remove all the doubts. But, the more and more I worked on the project, the more doubts I actually had because there was contradictions that I couldn't reconcile that were coming up in the Sheikh's teachings. Right. So, and just a little tangent, one of the benefits that, that happened with me doing this project was I got to see all the Sheikh's teachings at one time, right, in one place. So his teachings from 1970s all the way up to like, you know, the 2000s, I could now see and compare. Whereas people that don't have that, you forget things, right? We're human. You know, we forget that, you know, in the 1970s and 80s, the Sheikh was saying, you know, America is shaitan, death to America, and all these different things, right? Anti-American slogans. But then in 2000, he was saying things like, America's the most Muslim country in the world.
After
Like,
9/11?
yeah, after 9/11. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And just another little tangent, those military camps I was talking about, the military aspect of those stopped at 9/11. They're like, okay, no more
Okay.
military stuff because like this is going to bring red flags to us. We can't do that anymore. Right. So, but I had that benefit of having all that together and I could see like, wait a minute, you said A 10 years ago. Now you're saying B now. Two things are contradictory or whatever. But
Mhm.
I wanted to finish that project as like, okay, I got to finish this and then maybe I'll have clarity. Finish the project. And it was just like, okay, now the clarity was like, yeah, this is clear falsehood. So what I did is I wrote a very respectable letter to the Sheikh asking questions, just the questions I had, which like, okay, he's my Sheikh. He's my teacher. He should be able to clear up any of these doubts that I have. Right. Wrote the letter asking about the various beliefs that were taught and the various practices that were in the community. You know, I'm talking about like organized halal marriages, forced divorces, misappropriation of funds, and all types of like 10, not even everything, just like 10 main things I wrote about.
Mhm.
And just to back up a little bit, within those few years that I was kind of going back and forth through like learning of like, you know, trying to figure out what my beliefs were and learning more about Islam, I watched a documentary and it was on the it was one of the documentaries on the Jones cult, the Jim Jones.
Jonestown.
Yes. And it was going through the documentary and I noticed that like a lot of things they were talking about, I kept saying, that's kind of like us. That's kind of like us. Oh, yeah, we do that too. Or you know, it's just too many similarities. And through those years, I kind of got, I guess, obsessed or really digging into researching cults, just watching any documentary I could watch, reading literature on it. And this letter I wrote, I was also like a test. And I'm like, okay, if he responds like a stereotypical cult leader, because now I know how cult leaders respond. And like, if you ask questions, you're going to demonize, you're going to get kicked out. Then I'm very sure that he's a cult. But if he doesn't, then I'm good. I'm going to stay in the group. So like, all he would have had to do was just respond like a normal human being and not like a cult letter. And I would probably still be in the group to this day. But when I wrote the letter, the response I got, and I wrote this letter in 2018, the response I got back was, dogs keep barking and the caravan keeps moving on. Right? So essentially, he called me a barking dog. That was his response to me. No answers to any of the questions I had. No hadiths, no Quran, no nothing. Just call me a barking dog. And then a slew of reactions after that initial statement. And, you know, we can get into the details of it, but long story short, you know, they had a national meeting letting everybody know that I was a devil and that I was kicked out the group, not to associate with me. You know, they kicked me out the group, even though I already left. And then what cults do, then they split up my family, sent me death threats, and, you know, on and on and on.
And I do want to say here, if you see a sheikh or his muqaddams putting out messaging about the dogs bark, but the the full moon still shines, or the caravan goes on, whatever rendition of characterizing critics or people leaving the group as just dogs, then you should know there's a scandal in the group, usually, because I've seen that so many times. Sometimes it's the sheikh, sometimes he gets his muqaddams or top followers to put out this message about, there are some people whose hearts are turning away from the sheikh, or, exactly the same message about barking dogs. And that's indicative of some scandal that's going on and it's not being dealt with properly.
Exactly.
But
Yep.
that was around the time you and I got in touch, I believe. You were also called the shaitan, right?
Yes. So yeah, so I wrote the letter. I got the response back from the Sheikh, that, the barking dog comment. And then within the first few days of that happening, they were pretty much trying to assess where I was at. So
Okay.
the lower level leader, like the second level leaders, were messaging me, like trying to guilt trip me, gaslight me, and try to like see, pretty much they were trying to see if, am I really off the juice? Can we like get him back? Can we get him
Loyalty
to crawl
test.
back? Yeah, it was pretty much that. And like and what I see is that see that I wasn't budging, right? they're sending messages like, how could you? You're so disrespectful. And then if I don't, knowing I wasn't disrespectful, if I wasn't apologizing and saying, oh, sorry, please let me back in, that pretty much informed them of how to go to the next step. So
Right.
the next step they did was they issued me a formal dismissal notice, right? And someone came to my house, or some young kid that I used to, do activities with and seen him grow up, comes to my house, hands me an envelope, and it pretty much says, you are hereby dismissed from the community. Kind of plain Jane, right? They didn't want to put too much in writing. You're dismissed from the community, and that's it. At the same time, they made an announcement, because now, like, I'm still connected to people in the community, right? People are still telling me things. They made an announcement to have a national meeting. That means at every location, they were required to go to their properties and have it was like a Skype, same time, everybody would tune in, and they addressed the whole community. At that meeting, they informed everybody that I was kicked out the group, let them know that I was influenced by Shaitan, and then also told everybody that, I disrespected the Sheikh. I sent him a nasty letter with all these accusations, like basically mischaracterized my whole thing, and also said the Sheikh answered every single one of his questions, but he still wasn't satisfied. Like they basically, like, they framed it, gave the narrative that they wanted to give, that, the Sheikh's so innocent and he answered his questions, that, this is just a rogue guy that is just being influenced by Shaitan. Then so that happened. And then people that knew me still were kind of like, something's going on, because like I said, when I mentioned earlier how we would kind of just blame a lot of things that went wrong, like either on the administration, on people, on just the organization. Nothing was ever associated with the Sheikh. So the people
Mhm.
that I'm connected with are doing the same thing. They want to blame the middlemen,
Right.
right? And this is exactly why, like, a lot of these groups, they set up a way that, you have the Sheikh at the top and those people below him, the Khalifas, the Muqaddams, whoever. It's really just a form of barrier for plausible deniability.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
didn't say that. They said that. They can always back out of something, right? And the people, because they love the Sheikh so much, they don't want to blame him for anything. They want to blame the other people they know are just regular people like them. So there's a lot of that. Some people spoke up in my behalf, which one was my brother. Notable ones was my brother, my older brother, and another one was an acquaintance I had that lived in Virginia. And they pretty much said, like, this is wrong to kick him out the group without having him, like, due processed, and, all these different things. It's wrong to do this to a person. And then they issued a memo with me and my brother's name on it, basically saying that we're tools of Shaitan. They are Shaitan. They're the devil, kicking my brother out the community as well. So that was the next thing that happened. So now we're like, okay, we're all just sitting here kicked out the community, and I'm getting messages from, like, some family members, like, hey, what's going on? People are asking me to send them the letter because they want to hear how bad this letter is. And when they read it, they're like, oh, that's nothing what they said. So, like, there's actually still people communicating with me from the community at this point, because again, they're associating it with, like, the administration. Then about 3 weeks after I wrote that letter, I met up getting breakfast, and I get a text from my brother, and then I also get a text very shortly after that from my acquaintance in Virginia. And they're like, hey, did anybody call your wife and tell them that they got to divorce you? And I'm like, no. So I immediately, like, text and call my wife. But yeah, sure enough, they did the night before. So I'm on my way to work. So I'm trying to text my wife, hey, where are you at? Where are you going? She's not responding. I go home. My house is cleared out. My wife, my kids, all gone. All the belongings are gone. And what essentially happened is that night before, the Sheikh had his leaders contact my wife, my brother's wife, and my friend from down south wife on the same night. And the Sheikh told them that pretty much you can't remain in the community if you're still married to those individuals. And those individuals made their choice that they left, and we're all forcibly divorced on the same night. And that was pretty much what's led to up to all the kind of stuff I'm doing now with, the work I'm trying to do to help combat spiritual abuse. But yeah, that was kind of like the last straw that directly affected my life. But again, as I mentioned before we started, I'm still dealing with the ramifications of that to this day.
Right. Because in many, many cases, Shaykh of the Tariqa will actually tell these ex-wives to keep the children away from the father as well.
Yep. That's
Sometimes even having the group say that the dad's, unstable or unfit to be around the children, or a threat, something of that nature. Many, many cases that I've been contacted for where the Sufi Sheikh is telling the ex-wives to keep the kids away. The father's trying to even talk to the Sheikh, like, "What are you doing? This is my right." And he'll just shun him and work with her, of like affirming that you're not doing anything wrong, keep them away from him, keep them away from.
This is exactly what happened in my case. So like when my wife left, I personally think she had a psychotic break that affects her to this day. Well, Allah knows best, but I had finally gotten, so I was texting around, calling family members, trying to figure out where my wife and my kids went. No one was telling me anything, right? They were lying to me. Oh, we don't know. We don't know. One person, one of my in-laws was like, oh, just don't worry. They're fine. Thankfully, somebody from her side of the family recognized what was going on was wrong, contacted me and said, oh, she's on her way to South Carolina. So like, again, I live in New York. People came in my house overnight, packed up stuff, took all my belongings, all my kids' belongings, left. And then she was on her way to go move to South Carolina with my children. And at the time I had a 18-year-old or 17-year-old daughter, a 16-year-old son, 9-year-old daughter, and a newborn daughter. Okay. All gone. And so when I finally texted my wife, because she wasn't responding, I was like, I know you're on your way to South Carolina. And I was like, and pretty much had to threaten. I was like, if you don't like answer or tell me what's going on or come back, I'm going to have to call the cops. Then she finally responded. And then we're in conversations, I'm trying to convince her to come back. I'm trying to convince her that this stuff is wrong. And, and she was thoroughly confused and torn. And the conversations were, very revealing of like what the mindset was while she was going through that. Because if I rewind a little bit, when I sent that letter to the Sheikh and he responded by saying I'm a dog, I sat my family down and I just kind of put it all out there for them. And I told my kids, I was like, we as a family, I told my kids and my wife, we as a family are not going to be part of this group anymore, right? We're not part of this group because it's a cult. And I explained it and all that. And then I explained to them, I was like, okay, but I know there's going to be some gray area because you guys have family and friends that are part of this group, right? And however, we're not going to be part of the group, but I'm not going to separate you from your family, right? And I'm not going to separate you from your friends. But as far as Islamic community events and being part of the community, we're going to join the local community here and be a part of that. And then I told my ex-wife, I said, I know you were born and raised in this, so it's going to be a little different for you. I'm not going to force you to do anything, but you're going to have to like realize and recognize and have to, recognize what this is, but you're going to have to make a decision at some point of whether you want to belong to or not, but I'm not going to force you to do anything. Fast forward to like when she's on her way down south, we have the conversations and she's straight up, just to get to what you mentioned about the Sheikh saying like, you got to take the kids from him. She's word for word said to me, I'm trying to save our kids from you. And I was, and it was that statement right there. And there was another one where I was like, oh, she's gone. Right. So she said that. And like, she was during these conversations on the phone, she was literally begging me to come back to the community so that we could stay married. Just come back, just join so that we could stay married, saying these things. And again, during this time, I was, my iman's high. I'm really on my deen. I'm, doing all the outwardly things that if you look at somebody like, oh, he's a good Muslim. And this is when I was like, okay, she's really gone. This was the last one. I was like, I can't do anything here. She said, I don't understand how you could be reading Quran and getting up for tahajjud and doing all these things, but still be an enemy of the Sheikh. And she didn't say it as if like there was a contradiction, as like she knows I'm a good person and doubting that I was an enemy of a Sheikh. She was saying it from the perspective like, I know you're an enemy of a Sheikh, but I don't understand how an enemy could still also look pious. And that's when I realized like, oh, there's no hope here. So at the end of that, I pretty much said like, okay, well, to protect her, I was like, we're not actually divorced because you can't just divorce, right? Like that, it doesn't work that way, right? Islamically, like a man has to give there's a kula or there's a qadi gives a divorce. The woman just doesn't say, oh, I divorce you, I'm gone, right? So to protect her and to kind of just like save myself the trouble, I said, just ask for a kula. That way, like, you're not going to be on the hook for like leaving your husband's permission and getting cursed and all these different things. and I'll grant you a kula. It took convincing her a while. Then she finally asked for a kula. Then I granted it to her. Then we were officially divorced at that point. And when she got back, I was trying to see my kids, and she was preventing me from seeing the kids. Even having my older kids, like, take my younger kids, my infant, and away from wherever I would show up. And then that's where I had no choice but to take it to the courts and pursue custody of my kids. Otherwise, I wouldn't have any involvement in it.
And that custody case is ongoing, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so the custody case, started back in 2018. And at this point, remember, I had, a daughter who's 17, a son who's 16, a daughter who's 9. So 4 kids that are all in custody age. Since 2018, my 2 older kids, my 17, they're in their 20s now. You're talking, 7 years ago. I haven't had any relationship with them at all. No relationship with my 2 older kids. Within the first few years, I finally got a custody agreement from the courts where I had joint custody, and I got to share time, 50-50 time, for my 2 younger kids. So that went on for a couple of years until 2 or 3 years ago, when my then 9-year-old daughter, who's now 15, 16, has now taken the route of now she doesn't want to see me anymore. So I'm back in court again, trying to save my relationship with what remains of my kids, which is a whole nother discussion because, man living in this secular society and having to deal with custody courts, like, we know what that ends up. It's not favorable for us.
Yeah, subhanAllah, may Allah make it easy for you. And what would your advice be to people in these situations? As I mentioned, many fathers have contacted me with similar issues with the Shaykh of the Tariqa turning the children or the wife, both usually, against the father, or even telling the wife to turn the children against the father and to keep them away.
It's very tough because every situation is different. I don't want to go so far to tell people like what to do, but I would say that the one thing that you should do is actually learn the laws. Like, if you're living in the West, in your country, in your state, as far as custody, and you have to learn those things first, right? I went into my situation very naive, very green, thinking that, like, oh yeah, there's going to be justice, and there's no in the West, United States, there's no justice in family court, right? There really isn't. So you have to learn these things first so that you go in prepared. But as far as like dealing with your children, you have to do what is going to, at the end of the day, when you stand before Allah, and if Allah asks you, what did you do to try to save your children? You have to do the things that you think that would be sufficient to give an answer to Allah of what you did to try to save your children. But you have to be realistic and have realistic expectations, because the odds are not in your favor in general, especially if you're a man going into these situations, especially living in the West. There's a lot of mistakes that I've made trying to save my children, reach my children, get through to my children. And the best you could do is just do the best that you can do and take it to Allah, make dua to Allah, and always have a door open for that whenever there is a slight chance that they may be receptive to walking through that door to try to get guidance, right? And that's kind of like the best advice I can give without getting into specific situations, because every situation is just so different.
Jazakallah khair, that's valuable advice. And obviously from your own family, it's the most serious and hurtful. But what about old friends and community members? If you've tried to talk to them, would they return salams? Do they ignore you?
Yeah, so when I went through that period of, there was like limbo period where people were still contacting me, or they're still blaming it on the Sheikh. At a certain point, it became known that the Sheikh called me a barking dog. So now in their minds, you're like, okay, I can't blame it on the administration anymore. The Sheikh has made it clear that this guy's an enemy. He's an enemy of Ahl Bayt. He's an enemy of our, and at that point, it was kind of like radio silence. All my friends I mentioned, that I grew up with since I was 14, 15 years old, went to school with, they all cut me off. I tried to reach out to them. They wouldn't respond, or they would just basically say something that's like, I don't deal with you anymore. When I see these individuals in the public, remember, these are people that were like, again, remember I was going through they like thought of me as a high status, right? Be happy to see me, want me to work with their kids, individuals that were like wanting me to be the mayor of the land, like all these different things. I'd see them in public. I'd give salams because it's just a natural reaction. You see a Muslim that you give assalamu alaikum. They wouldn't return salams. And I'll say that'd be 90% of them. There'd be a handful here and there that would still return salams. But pretty much I was cut off. All the people that I grew up with, loved, were my best friends. They loved me, or at least I thought. They cut me off. And now these are people that especially like the friend group I have, these are people that at that time I would have died for, right? I would have died for, I would have killed for, and I would have thought the feeling was mutual. But because the Sheikh made it clear that I was an enemy and that I was a shaitan and all that, they knew the Sheikh's position. Immediately, they cut me off.
And I know of another tariqa as well, where the Sheikh says to treat members who've left as ex-Muslims, as murtads.
Mm-hmm.
And this type of shunning and just avoiding cutting off those who have left is far more common than we would think. And what you mentioned about the brotherhood, the friendships, is really important, because something I've tried to stress as well on the articles I've written about leaving these groups is that any group you have that's centered around a personality, where, as you mentioned, where the activity is speaking about how Ajib the Sheikh is, he's so amazing, and we're so blessed to be with the Sheikh, those relationships are actually all contingent with your relationship with the Sheikh. And as soon as that goes south, then you're no longer one of the brothers, you're no longer a friend, you're just cut off, ostracized, and demonized, literally. Like you were called the shaitan, demonized. And this is what people have to understand, that when you go to these living communities, because, the more fitna you're going to have, the Sufi Tariqa, you're going to find groups within them who are going to exploit that and start their communities. LGBT is a big thing. Okay, come live with us in the land we have. Join our homeschooling. So they're like a solution to the outside fitna. And people will move there, they'll join, but they need to understand all these relationships is dependent on their relationship with the Sheikh. So when people invest that much, even when they see it all go south, when they see clear corruption from the Sheikh, they would rather ignore it than to lose what they've invested so much in. It's also embarrassing, right? Because they've probably heard from friends and family who are skeptical, oh, you're joining a cult. Then they realize they actually did. So it's better to just act like, nothing's wrong. It's the problem with these people who don't understand this is the nature of organizations and nothing's ever perfect. And they'll go on, because they just don't want to come to terms with reality. And that's why when you're ever in these, Sufi communities or groups that are based on personality, and especially if it's one that you're going to move for, you have to know what happens when the Sheikh starts going off the rails. Is there any mechanism? Is there any way to hold him accountable? Whether he's the main Sheikh or it's in the name of a Sheikh who's overseas, and you're just going to say, well, it's by his blessing, so it doesn't matter what happens here, it's by the blessing of that Sheikh, and he says it's okay, he says to overlook this abuse and corruption because there's a greater benefit in it.
Yeah, there's a few things that, like, I guess you could say, rhetoric in the community, and that I've seen, I guess, around online from various groups where, like, for instance, they would use the incident with Nuh alayhi salam, with his son going up the mountain instead of getting on the boat, as like a justification to cut off family members, right? Like, oh, he didn't listen to Allah. And, for them, the Sheikh is a representative of Allah. He's communicating directly what Allah's will is. So if you don't do what the Sheikh says, that means you're just like Nuh's son, and you can cut that family member off, right? They would use that. I don't know if you heard the one where there was a Sheikh that, I think it's attributed to Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, but I'm not sure. But there was a Sheikh that was like, he fell in love with some woman, and she had him like sleeping in a pig pen or something. And his students they went and seen him, and so they stopped following him because he was sleeping in a pig pen amongst the pigs. And then supposedly Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani said, oh, you're supposed to follow your Sheikh even if he's in the pig pen. And they use that as justification. It doesn't matter what your Sheikh does, you still got to follow him. So there's all these different, like, we call them like Sufi stories, where like there's no reliability, but it just reinforces that to the members, that you just do whatever the Sheikh says. As long as the Sheikh gives permission for it, you could do it, you could follow it, and it's okay. It doesn't matter, And I know one of the things they did with me, and we've heard people say this, is like they use individuals like myself or other people that they demonize as an example. And people have literally said, like, I'm not saying nothing because I can't lose my wife. And it's like they don't realize that they're acknowledging that it's wrong. And they're acknowledging that they do want to say something, but they're saying, I don't want to go through what you did, so I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah. And I do want to ask you about the history of this group, because one of the tragedies is that this did come out or emerge from what we could call a pretty historically significant Muslim American group, correct?
Yep.
and it
Yep.
ended up being this.
Yeah. So if we go back, there was, and this is like the early 70s, there was the Dar al-Islam movement. And how the Dar al-Islam movement started, I'm going to give like cliff notes because it's very intricate. People should look it up to kind of get the history of, especially if you're an American, you get the history of how Islam developed, Sunni Islam developed in America. But it was a few individuals, that African-American individuals, that when they're going to masjids and they're learning Islam through, immigrants that were here to, spread and teach Islam. However, dealing with, we have to acknowledge that in our ummah, we do deal with racism and different things that different races face, especially as African Americans. They decided that, okay, we need to have our own group in masjid. So these African American brothers got together with some other African American brothers and started what is known as the Dar al-Islam movement. And it started in New York City, but it branched out to New Jersey, Philadelphia, and then branched out to California and different locations all across the United States. And I would say even to today, because we don't have this today, it was the largest cohesive Sunni Muslim organization in the United States under one leadership, right? Because nowadays you have masjid here, masjid there. Every masjid has their own board and own imam. And these had the same thing, but they had one leadership that was central in New York City. Big group, thousands of members. If you go to probably most major cities, especially on the East Coast, and you go to the original masjids that were there, you're probably going to find some older members that were part of the Dar al-Islam movement, especially if they're African American.
I remember speaking to someone else who was in the same group as you, and he's much, much older. And he mentioned to me that, some of these brothers that came into this tariqa, they were actually with Malcolm X, and they didn't have a lot of knowledge, but they had the spirit of Islam, that they were so dedicated, they were doing things. But the big mistake that they made was they humbled themselves to the Sufi Sheikh, and that's where all their efforts just went to this nonsense.
Yep. And it was, so in the group, there was a time where they were growing. And just like any organization or any group, they're going to feel the test of any group or any organization goes through as they grow. And they got to a point where certain people wanted to be leaders, certain people wanted to go in this direction or that direction, and historically this is when Saudi was sending lots of money over to the United States to fund people to start masjids, right? I forget the name of that program they had, but they put money on the table and say, hey, we'll give you all these hundreds of thousands of dollars and we'll start a masjid. You just have to come over here, learn our version of Islam and teach it.
So that was a very Salafi push?
Yeah, the Salafi push. Yeah. So they come over and push. Yep. And so they come over here with offer boatloads of bags of money to come sponsor you. But the Dar al-Islam movement, when that period hit, Bar Jilani, the Sheikh to end up breaking it all up and taking over as his cult leader, he kind of came in at the perfect time. Because in the leadership of the Dar al-Islam movement, there was dissension. You had individuals that were leaning towards the Sufi way. Then you had individuals that were leaning towards the Salafi way, hey, let's go get that money. Then you had individuals no, we started this group because we wanted a for us, by us group of why are we letting foreigners kind of dictate what we do? We want an American Muslim group. So you had people in the middle. There was bloodshed. People died over these leadership battles. And then during this turmoil, in comes this Pakistani sheikh who's posing himself as a knowledgeable sheikh and leader. And it wasn't because of that people followed him, actually. It was because it was almost like a mini coup. Because in the Dar al-Islam movement, they had what you call security forces. Individuals that actually, they provided security for their local Islamic neighborhoods, right? Kind of like if you look at the Malcolm X movies or documentaries, and you had the Nation of Islam, they had those militant type members that would kind of police. The Dar al-Islam had the same thing. They were the muscle of the group. They decided to basically put Mubarak Jilani in place as the leader. And because they were the strength of the community, and there was so much turmoil at the time, the then leader of the community decided to just submit and let Mubarak Jilani be the leader. And it was under duress. It was pretty much if you don't accept him, we're going to kill you. And so he accepted. And then that's when when the leaders of the Dar al-Islam accepted him, all the following members then accepted him. And then the rest is history. And there's
Right.
a lot of things that we can, there's a lot of evidence that points to Mubarak Jilani possibly being an asset for the American government to break up an African American group, because at that same time, the American government was, they were monitoring Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., you had the Black Panther parties and all these different African American organizations that were actually considered terrorists. They didn't want African American groups to become solidified and connected and gain any power. And there's a lot of evidence that he was also attached to that, but that's a whole nother series.
Yeah, I think there was mention in some of the reports to prevent the rising of a black messiah like
Yep.
Malcolm X, right? And then
Yep.
even placing him would align with the Rand report that came out way later.
Yeah. Yep. Yep, exactly. So, and then when Mubarak Jilani came, and that's when there was a split in the Dar al-Islam movement, the majority of the Dar al-Islam movement just decided not to follow him. And they really couldn't keep it going after that, because the main leaders of the Dar al-Islam movement followed him. And that was the end of the Dar al-Islam movement. But then that's when they became al-Fuqra, or then because their al-Fuqra got busted for a bunch of terrorist crimes, they changed the name of the group to Muslims of the America. Then because Muslims of America got busted for some crimes, and they changed the name to the Muslims of the Americas. So that's what they are now. They changed the name multiple times, but yeah, there's well-documented evidence of various terrorist activities, assassinations, and different things they've done throughout the years, which, to be fair, they haven't done in recent times post 9/11 because of the risk that it would bring to the group.
Hmm. And then where can people read more about this or learn more about it? Do you have links on your channels?
So if you see here on the link below, it's at Return to Fitra. Just type that into your YouTube search and you'll find that up. You also see us on Instagram and TikTok, but most of the content is going to be on YouTube, especially the older videos. And there are other sources out there that if you just type into Google El Fukra or TMOA or Sheikh Mubarak Jilani, you'll find a lot of information. And I'll just caution you that 90% of the information you see is going to be true, right? So the majority of it is going to be true. However, 90% of the people providing that information are Zionist-funded organizations that are being paid to spread Islamophobia. So you have to take that information in context to know that these are people that are actually against Islam as whole. They just found this cult TMOA as a perfect example to try to push this as we are representative of all Muslims in the world, which, once you read the stuff in there, that is not true.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. And I'll link to the websites that you mentioned, as well as your work at Return to Fitra.
Alaikum salam, shukran for having me. I look forward to having more conversations in the future about this. And for anybody that is out there that is going through something similar or knows of other people going through something similar, just a little word of advice is, seek knowledge. That's the most important thing, is to seek knowledge. 2, I would say connect with the Ummah is very important. And the third thing I would say is to don't be afraid to speak out. It's our Islamic duty to protect ourselves, one, from the fire, and also to protect our families from the fire. So in speaking out, we have the hadith that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, when you see something evil, well, the first duty is to stop it with your hand. The second duty is, if you can't do that, then to speak out against it. And the third duty is, if you can't do that, then, hate it in your heart. But with hating it in your heart, as I speak to people that are a part of these, spiritually abusive groups, accompanying that hating in your heart is to actually leave the situation as to the best of your ability. So I'll just leave that advice for you guys, and inshallah we could connect and do some more things in the future.
Thank you for that valuable advice. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam.